stop the message. Better off to kill yourself.
Put it this way, the court has spoken clearly on the First Amendment, and it is a very high standard, which is to say it's very difficult to curtail or punish what the court considers to be pure political speech. And in this case, there's no question that this is political speech.
And, now let's really be factual, 3 lengthy interviews with 5 media outlets in his home 3 days after the boy died, several days before the funeral. Where do you think we got all that information to put in that epic about the divorce, about the housemaid, about raising him in the Catholic Church, about teaching him to celebrate Christmas? He went to the public airwaves on the occasion of the son's death. It might be helpful for you to go review the exhibits in the trial. The obituary had nothing to do with it.
Margie Phelps believes that she and her church are legally in the right.
Of course, separation of church and state means that the government keeps its mitts off of our religion, and they would do well to remember that. But as far as you know, the First Amendment covers both speech and religion.
My guess is they took this case to sort of put an exclamation mark on how important free speech is to them.
This case was first heard in the District Court of Maryland. The jury found favor in Snyder and awarded compensatory damages, also referred to as actual damages. In this case, the church was required to compensate Snyder for harm suffered as a result of the protesting. He was also awarded punitive damages. These are awarded if there is actual malice or intent in the case. The court awarded these damages because the church was found guilty of invasion of privacy and emotional distress. The church appealed and the case was heard in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. The decision from the lower court was reversed, and the appeals court determined that the church's speech was protected by the First Amendment.
The court said, this was political hyperbole, it was exaggeration, and it was not directed toward the Snyder family. They were using the occasion of this funeral, the court reasoned, to make a political statement about other things.
The United States Supreme Court upheld the decision of the appeals court on the basis that the speech was a matter of public concern.
The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land, and usually when the Supreme Court gets a case, 2, 3, 4 courts have already heard it, or a bunch of courts have heard it and disagreed on what the law requires. So by definition almost, the Supreme Court gets the hardest cases, and what I mean by that is cases for which the law is unfathomable. It's just ambiguous. And in those situations, I think the court oftentimes has to rely on what you call situational ethics, or their own values, or what they think is practical, or what they think the consequences will be, things that we usually consider to be extra legal factors.
The vote in the Supreme Court was 8 in favor of the church and 1 against. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion, while Justice Breyer wrote a concurrence, and Justice Alito wrote the dissent. The First Amendment free speech clause protects certain speech, but it is based on whether or not the speech is considered public or private concern. This court affirmed that the speech in question is of public concern. Chief Justice Roberts said,
"We have explained in our prior cases that speech on public issues, quote, is more than self-expression. It is the essence of self-government," end quote, and is therefore entitled to special protection. As we have made clear in our precedents, if there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable, end quote.
The court also found that the church's speech was protected because it occurred in the public arena. It was peaceful, and the church obeyed all laws and cooperated with law enforcement.
The facts of this case, probably the most compelling part, is that these people, the Westboro Church, acted lawfully, and they did not disrupt the funeral itself. And when you start to try to draw these lines, it becomes very difficult. If we say, okay, you can't demonstrate anywhere near where these people might be, then we'd have all sorts of cases. How far do they have to be away? Where are we going to draw these lines? How do we enforce this kind of stuff? Do we just write laws on the basis of, the hurt feelings of people who might be victims of this action?
Justice Alito dissented and said, "Our profound national commitment to free and open debate is not a license for the vicious verbal assault that occurred in this case."
That was one of the central holdings in this, is that the Snyder family clearly was hurt, but they were not the targets of this protest. They provided the occasion for this protest to get a lot of attention, but the court said it was not directed at the Snyders, so that lessens the Snyders' ability to get a financial award out of it.
The court also said that because of the situation, there was no issue of invasion of privacy. The church obeyed the law, and the facts show the Snyder family did not see anything more than the tops of the signs until later, nor did they hear any of the protests. The court also said that there was no issue of defamation because the church was not directing their speech at the Snyder family.
But if the factual situation had been different, then maybe I would have gone another way. And the court very well could have gone in a different direction if the Westboro church people had been right in their face, standing in the cemetery, shouting this while they're trying to bury him. So sometimes factual nuance is really important in a court decision. Where the law is murky, then that opens the door for all of these other factors to come into play. And as I suggested, the higher you go up in the judicial hierarchy, the more the law gets murky. And an interesting thing for me is not whether they analyzed the First Amendment correctly, but why they chose to view it in one way or another. So the decision's pretty much made. As soon as the court said, this is free speech, all the precedents dealing with free speech fall into place, and the outcome is pretty automatic. Almost for sure it's going to be protected.
I saw the funeral from the freeway. Flag waving necromancy was well underway. Your son was born on the 4th of July. But you raised him for the devil, didn't think he would die. You lied and taught him God loves everyone. His moral compass broken, now you're burying his son. So this song is not for him. It's for you. Cause you're drunk on the poison, but we got the remedy. The remedy is your obedience. It's not for you to get your moan on. It ain't no comedy, you got it serious. It's your responsibility to obey his word. I say the tragedy is how you're gonna spend eternity now when you're done for pain. And you'll be cursing all of your friends, cause they all applauded your sin till the